On March 24, 2022, around 11 p.m., Orlando FreeFall at Icon Park, the world's tallest drop tower, was operating normally. A larger rider was directed to sit in seat number 1 by the ride's operators, as it was known to be more accommodating to larger riders. The ride operators loaded other riders, then visually checked all the seats on the ride, ensuring the safety light was illuminated for each loaded seat. After these checks were complete, the ride was started. As it rose, one operator joked to one of the riders to,
"Hey, you check your seatbelt or let's not? Seatbelt!"
which the ride was not designed to be equipped with. The ride climbed the 430-foot tall tower and the seats tilted forwards 30 degrees. With the riders now facing the ground, the ride dropped. As the ride reached the bottom of the tower and started to slow down, the rider in seat number 1 slipped under the restraint and fell to the ground, where they were killed. Quest Engineering was contracted by the state of Florida to investigate the accident. Their investigation would examine the setup and maintenance of the ride specifically, leaving the operational procedures to the state and other agencies. Quest had experience with ride accidents in the state of Florida, having previously investigated the Sandblaster roller coaster accident. They first looked at all the mechanical components of the ride and determined that there had been no mechanical failure. All parts of the ride had operated without mechanically breaking in any way. Seat 1, the seat where the ejected rider had been sitting, had striations on the seat base that indicated the rider had slid over them with some force when they were ejected. These striations were specifically located on the seat horn, which was designed to work with the over-the-shoulder restraint to keep the rider in the seat. They measured the distance between the seat horn and the bottom of the over-the-shoulder restraint. This gap is referred to as the restraint opening. When the restraint was sufficiently closed and the restraint opening was small enough, 2 safety lights would illuminate. These were lights located next to each seat and on the control panel. Without every light illuminated, the ride would not be allowed to dispatch by the ride's control system. The system that determined if a restraint was in the proper position was a magnetic sensor attached to the pivot point of the restraint. As the restraint rotated downward, the magnetic sensor would detect a metal flag plate, telling the ride's control system that that particular restraint was secured in the proper position. The exact location of these sensors could be adjusted by use of 2 screws located near the sensor. This would only allow for a small change in the position of the sensor, but it would result in a huge change in the restraint opening. The inspectors measured the widest allowable restraint opening of all restraints on the ride, excluding seats 1 and 2, and found that the average opening was between 2.65 inches and 4.28 inches, with an average maximum restraint opening of 3.33 inches. Seats 2 and 1 were measured to have a maximum allowed restraint opening of 6.51 inches for seat number 2 and 7.19 inches for seat 1, where the ejected rider was seated. The inspectors looked at the magnetic seat sensors for seat 1 and 2 and found evidence that they had been adjusted from their original position after the ride had been installed. This was evidenced by wear marks on the steel mounting plates for the sensors. It was found that if these plates had been kept in their original position, the restraint opening for seat 1 and 2 would have been closer to 3 inches, much like the other unadjusted seats on the ride. Instead, with the adjusted sensor, the ride system was now reading seat number 1 and 2 as being secured like all the other restraints on the ride, even though there could be a gap of around 7 inches between the horn of the seat and the bottom of the restraint. Next, the inspectors tested the amount of give in the restraint system when force was applied to it. This would seek to determine if the restraint opening would grow when force was applied, and if it did grow, by how much. The ride used twin hydraulic cylinders to secure the restraints. These are usually some of the safest designs out there due to their redundant nature and the fact that they can lock in any position, meaning usually restraints of this design have very little movement from their locked position when force is applied. The inspectors applied approximately 250 pounds of force to the restraint from the seat horn. They found that this caused the restraint opening to grow by up to 3 inches, a very large change for restraints of this design. Evidence from the accident video showed that the ride was initially started with the restraint opening around 6 inches. The restraint opening then looked to grow as large as 10 inches when the rider was ejected. Additionally, the investigation measured that the ride exerted positive 4 Gs of deceleration when braking, meaning that all riders on the ride would weigh 4 times their normal weight. Inspectors then tested the ability for a rider to escape from the restraints with them secured in positions ranging from 6 to 10 inches of restraint opening. The inspectors, who were each between 6 foot 3 inches and 6 foot 5 inches tall and weighed between 200 and 300 pounds, were all able to slide out of the restraints with little issue. Moving on to the ride's operation. The owners of the ride, Orlando Slingshot, otherwise known as the Slingshot Group, trained and continues to train all of their operators internally. They never provided any kind of training manual to the operators of the ride. Funtime, the ride's manufacturer, provided one when the ride was purchased. This manual states that operators should check each seat by pulling on it. This was not performed on the day of the accident. Instead, all seats were checked visually to ensure the safety light was on. The manual also states that riders who appear to be too large for the seats should not ride. The accident video shows the restraint of the ejected rider significantly higher than the restraints of those around them, making it obvious to any well-trained operator that something was off. Additionally, the manual explains that altercations to the ride system are not permitted without the approval and supervision of the ride's manufacturer, Funtime. Additionally, the paperwork for the ride's operation on the day of the accident was examined. Not only was it found that several operators working the ride that day had not signed any kind of training paperwork, meaning it was not clear if they were properly trained or not, but also the ride's operating paperwork for the day of the accident had been forged and the ride had been signed off for operation that day by someone who is not even working. The ride's owner would later insist that the operators working were properly trained and just had not signed official paperwork. Though without this paperwork, this cannot be verified. The Quest Engineering investigation concluded with investigators stating that the adjustments of Seat 1's proximity seat sensor was the principal cause of the accident. The investigators closed by stating that though this was the direct cause of the accident, there were many other potential contributing factors and they were not assuring the safety of the ride in the normal, unadjusted restraint position. They recommended a further investigation into the design, safety, operation, and history of the ride be performed. This unfortunately would not occur, but with these facts uncovered, we can reconstruct an accurate recreation of the events on March 24, 2022 at Icon Park. On March 24, 2022 at Icon Park in Orlando around 11 p.m., Orlando FreeFall was operating normally, or as normally as this ride was capable of being operated at the time. Riders were being loaded from the line and onto the gigantic ride. A larger rider was directed by the operators to sit in seat number 1 as it was known to accommodate larger riders. The adjusted restraint was pulled down by the rider to a restraint opening of around 6 inches. The adjusted magnetic sensor on the back of the rider's restraint read as it being secured, and the safety light on the ride and the control panel read as secured for seat number 1. The operators saw this light was illuminated and moved on to other seats. After visually verifying most seats in a seemingly random order by one operator, the ride was allowed to be dispatched by the operators. The ride's control system, reading every restraint as being closed to a safe position, started the winch to pull the rider vehicle to the top of the tower. The restraint on seat 1 was visually higher than all other seats on the ride. Instead of noticing this, an operator near seat 1 joked with the other riders on the ride to secure their seatbelts, even though none were installed on the ride. The ride ascended its 430-foot tower, rotating 4 times on the way up. At the top of the tower, the seats tilted 30 degrees and the catch car detached from the rider vehicle. The ride then plummeted down the tower at nearly 80 miles per hour. Near the bottom of the ride, the rider vehicle passed over magnetic brakes that caused a rapid deceleration of the rider vehicle as designed. This exerted over 4 Gs of force on all riders, including the rider in seat number 1. The rider in seat 1 pressed hard against the restraint with so much force that the restraint opening became as wide as 10 inches. The rider slipped through this opening and fell to the ground at great speed. The rider was killed after striking the paved ground. One operator rushed over to the scene and began questioning the operator who assisted in checking seats, asking, and the operator responded with, emergency services were called and the ride was shut down for investigation. The modified restraint seat sensor position was the primary cause of the accident. The person who modified the restraint has not been revealed. In the subsequent legal proceedings following the accident, the ride's owner has stated that he knows who modified the restraints, though authorities so far have been uninterested in finding out, blaming the ride's owner for apparently not knowing what was going on at his ride. As of this video's creation, no criminal charges have been filed, but a criminal investigation is still ongoing. Originally, the ride's owner was to pay a $250,000 fine to the state of Florida and be barred from operating any rides in the state of Florida. This was appealed by the Slingshot Group and was changed to only include the fine and to ban the drop tower from ever operating in Florida again. Other Slingshot Group rides would be allowed to continue to operate. The ride's owner settled with the family of the ejected rider for an undisclosed amount. There are continuing lawsuits against Funtime and Gerstlauer, the manufacturer of the ride, and its restraints brought by the family of the ejected rider, alleging that the restraints were inadequate and the restraint seat sensors could be modified too easily. The drop tower was dismantled in March 2023 and is currently for sale. As of this video's creation, it remains to be seen if someone else will buy the ride. As the dust from this accident slowly begins to settle, it's worth reflecting on the impact it has already had on the industry. In the state of Florida, legislation has been proposed that makes ride inspections stricter. The proposed bill would also prevent the release of the investigation reports like the one I used to create this video until an accident investigation is fully complete. This would be part of an effort to prevent the kind of speculation and media frenzy that surrounded this accident for the last few months. There was such a frenzy that I was even invited to speak on a news channel about this accident, just for making these videos, to which I declined. The investigation into the actual design of the ride was never completed, likely because those in charge of the investigation believed they had enough information after discovering the modified restraint sensor position. I rode this exact attraction on March 15, 2022, just 9 days before the accident. I was interested in visiting Slingshot Group attractions as at the time I had just released a What Really Happened video on a different Slingshot Group ride accident in Kissimmee. This was also following the death of a maintenance worker on a different Slingshot Group attraction a few years earlier. Part of the reason for my visit was to see if ride operations were being taken more seriously as a result of the 2021 accident. When I visited, I observed that operators were still treating safety as the second most important aspect of their job, behind fun. Little did I know that just 9 days later, another accident would occur under similar circumstances. We may never know who adjusted the seat sensor on seat number 1, when exactly they did it, or what their motives were, but it's safe to say that the legacy of this accident will live on for a long time to come. Thanks for watching this episode of What Really Happened, and I'll see you next time.